Could a dog's dying growl rewrite a broken man's fate? Deep in the amber glow of Maple Grove, Tennessee, a three-legged hero named Scout weaves a saga of heart-stopping loyalty that'll grip your soul. Picture the electric jolt when Jim Sullivan finds his lost war dog, Scout, barely breathing in a forgotten barn after 7 years. Feel your heart race as Scout, scarred and frail, battles a knife-wielding intruder to shield Jim's life. Stand in awe as this battered K9, with a trembling salute, claims a nation's heart at the White House. But what final secret will Scout leave beneath a Tennessee maple tree, and will it spark a legacy to outshine his scars? Smash that subscribe button to uncover this tale of grit and grace, every paw print's a legend. Now let's ride into the epic today.
The Dog Stories 4.0.
Scout? God in heaven, is that you? James Sullivan's voice cracked, a raw whisper that hung in the stale air of an abandoned barn as his knees hit the dirt beside a creature he'd mourned for 7 long years. In the golden haze of autumn 2012, Maple Grove, Tennessee, lay nestled between rolling hills and fields of swaying wheat. The town was a quiet haven where the wind carried the scent of red clay and maple leaves, and time seemed to pause in the glow of dusk. Church bells rang softly from the white-steepled chapel on Main Street, and the town square, with its weathered statue of a Civil War soldier, hummed with the slow rhythm of small-town life. Old men swapping stories at the diner, kids chasing fireflies, and the faint strum of a country guitar drifting from a porch. For the folks of Maple Grove, life was simple, but for James Jim Sullivan, a retired Marine nearing 60, it was a fragile balance between survival and memory. Jim lived alone on a modest farmhouse at the town's edge, a place of sagging boards, a rusted tin roof, and a barn that hadn't housed horses in decades. His days were marked by solitude, black coffee at dawn, a walk through the fields to clear his head, and nights spent wrestling with ghosts from Afghanistan. The war had left its scars, deep lines etched across his face, a limp from shrapnel, and a heart heavy with losses he couldn't name. But none cut deeper than the loss of Scout, his K9 partner, a golden-coated dog who'd been his shadow through 3 tours. Scout had sniffed out mines, curled against Jim in freezing bunkers, and saved his life more times than he could count. 7 years ago, an explosion had torn their world apart. Blood, smoke, and a final report. Missing, presumed Kia. Jim had screamed into the desert, refusing to believe Scout was gone, but all he found was a bloodied collar tag, now tucked in a cigar box under his bed. That loss was a wound he carried in silence, a dagger that twisted in the quiet hours. That fall, life had dealt Jim another blow. The farmhouse roof, battered by years of Tennessee storms, had sprung a leak after a week of heavy rain. Water dripped into a tin bucket in the kitchen, a mocking reminder of his dwindling veteran's pension. The 2008 economic crash had stretched his finances thin, and new roofing materials were a pipe dream. Over coffee at the Main Street diner, where the jukebox played Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire, Jim overheard Hank Thompson, a fellow Marine with a gravelly laugh and a cane, mention an old barn near the wheat fields. Folks dump all kinds of junk there, Jim, Hank said, slicing into a wedge of pecan pie. Saw some good planks last month. Could save you $1. Jim nodded, his mind already turning. He'd always been a doer, a habit from his days in the Corps when hesitation meant death. With winter closing in, he couldn't afford to wait. So that afternoon, he climbed into his moss-green pickup, tossed a wooden ruler, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee onto the seat, and drove toward the barn, hoping to scavenge enough wood to patch his roof. The barn loomed at the edge of a wheat field, its gray boards warped and peeling, a relic of a farm long abandoned. The door groaned as Jim pushed it open, releasing a puff of dust that swirled in the slanting sunlight. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of rot, rust, and forgotten things, a chaotic pile of broken bicycles, torn burlap sacks, A rusted washing machine tilted like it might collapse. Jim's boots crunched on brittle straw as he stepped forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He moved with a soldier's precision, eyes scanning for usable planks, but his heart was elsewhere. The barn felt like a graveyard of discarded dreams, a mirror of his own life, worn, overlooked, filled with relics of a past no one cared to reclaim. He thought of Scout, as he often did in quiet moments, the dog's golden eyes flashing in his mind. "Where'd you go, buddy?" He'd whispered to the stars countless nights, never expecting an answer. The ache was familiar, a dull throb that never quite faded. Then, a sound pierced the silence, a faint, ragged breath, like a sigh torn from pain. Jim froze, his marine instincts snapping to attention. It wasn't the wind whistling through cracked boards or the creak of settling wood. It was alive, fragile, and close. His pulse quickened, a drumbeat in his chest, as he held his breath and listened. The sound came again, softer, almost lost in the barn's stillness, from behind a pile of burlap sacks. "Who's there?" he called, his voice low, steady, but his hand tightened on the flashlight like a weapon. No answer, only that breath, weak and trembling. He moved forward, slow and deliberate, his boots careful not to disturb the straw. The beam of his flashlight swept across the sacks, and his heart lurched as he saw a shape, small, curled, barely distinguishable from the debris. Jim pushed the sacks aside, his hands shaking now, and what he saw stole the air from his lungs. A dog lay there, a skeletal shadow of a creature, its once golden coat matted with filth, caked with dried blood and mud. One hind leg was twisted at a grotesque angle, clearly broken and never healed right. One eye was clouded white, blind, while the other, a pale gold, glinted faintly in the flashlight's glow. The dog's ribs jutted sharp beneath patchy fur, each breath a labored heave, as if life itself was a battle it was losing. It was barely a dog anymore, a husk, a remnant of something that had fought to survive against impossible odds. But what stopped Jim's heart was the worn leather collar around its neck, torn and stained with rust, yet holding a small metal tag that caught the light. He knelt, his knees sinking into the dirt, his breath shallow. His hands, rough from years of war and work, trembled as he reached for the tag. The metal was cold, the engraving faded but unmistakable. Scout. Jim's world tilted, a rush of disbelief and grief crashing over him like a wave. "Scout? God in heaven, is that you?" he whispered, his voice breaking, raw with a pain he'd buried deep. This was no dream, no trick of a weary mind. This was Scout, his battle brother, the dog who'd run through gunfire, who'd saved him from mines, who'd vanished in a blast that left only blood and despair. 7 years ago, Jim had knelt in the Afghan dust, screaming Scout's name, finding only a bloody tag and a report that read missing, presumed Kia. He carried that tag home, tucked it in a cigar box with his medals, a relic of a loss too heavy to bear. Yet here, in a forgotten barn in Tennessee, Scout lay before him, alive, broken, but breathing. Jim's fingers brushed the collar, the leather cracking against his callous skin. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and unbidden, spilling down his weathered cheeks. Scout's good eye flickered, a faint spark of recognition, and a low whine escaped his throat, not a cry for help, but a whisper from a soul that hadn't given up. Jim's chest tightened, a sob caught in his throat. He saw Scout as he'd been, strong, fearless, leaping from their armored truck, barking warnings that saved lives. Now he was a shadow, his body ravaged by time, hunger, and wounds untold. The sight tore at Jim's heart, a mix of joy and anguish. Joy that Scout was alive, against all odds. Anguish at the suffering etched into every rib, every scar, every labored breath. "What happened to you, buddy?" he murmured, his voice thick with guilt. "Where have you been all this time?" How Scout ended up in that barn wasn't a mystery wrapped in miracles. It was a cruel twist of a world that discards what it no longer needs. Maple Grove's abandoned barn was a dumping ground, a place where folks left broken furniture, rusted tools, and unwanted things. Scout, after the blast in Afghanistan, might have survived by sheer will, wandering through deserts, forests, or towns, scavenging for scraps. Perhaps he'd been taken in briefly, only to be cast out when his injuries made him a burden. Or maybe he'd fled, driven by instinct, until he found shelter in the barn, hiding from rain and predators. The collar, still bearing his name, was proof he'd clung to his identity, a soldier's pride that refused to fade. It was logical, in a heartbreaking way, that a dog like Scout, trained to endure, to protect, would end up in a place like this, waiting, as if he knew Jim would come. Jin's hands moved gently, sliding beneath Scout's frail body. He was light, too light, his bones sharp against Jim's palms. Scout didn't resist, only let out another faint whine, his head resting against Jim's arm. "I've got you now," Jim said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "You're not alone anymore." He stood, cradling Scout like a child, and carried him to the truck. The wheat fields swayed in the wind, the barn silent behind them, a forgotten place that had, for one moment, held a miracle. Jim didn't know what lay ahead, whether Scout could survive, whether he could heal the wounds of 7 lost years. But as he laid Scout on the passenger seat, wrapping him in an old flannel shirt, he felt a spark he hadn't known in years: hope. This reunion, born of chance and pain, was the start of a journey that would mend 2 broken souls and touch a town, a nation, and hearts far beyond Maple Grove. The sun dipped low over Maple Grove, Tennessee, casting a golden glow across the wheat fields as Jim Sullivan's pickup truck rattled down the dirt road to his farmhouse. In the passenger seat, wrapped in an old flannel shirt, lay Scout, the dog whose frail breaths had just rewritten Jim's world. The barn, with its dust and discarded relics, was behind them now, but the weight of that reunion clung to Jim like morning fog. Scout's skeletal frame, his clouded eye, and the twisted leg spoke of battles fought alone, yet his faint whine in Jim's arms had sparked a fire of hope. As the truck rolled to a stop beside the sagging porch, Jim glanced at Scout, his heart a tangle of joy and fear. "We're home, buddy," he murmured, his voice soft as the evening breeze. He didn't know if Scout could survive the night, but he knew one thing: he'd fight for him, just as Scout had fought to live long enough to be found. Jim carried Scout into the farmhouse, stepping over the tin bucket catching drips from the leaky roof. The living room was sparse, a warm recliner, a coffee table scarred with cigarette burns, a radio humming Merle Haggard's My Tennessee Home low in the corner. He laid a thick wool blanket in the corner near the fireplace, adding a folded towel for extra cushion, and gently set Scout down. The dog's body sagged into the blanket, his ribs stark against the patchy fur, each breath a shallow rise and fall. Jim knelt beside him, his calloused hands hovering, unsure where to touch without causing pain. Scout's good eye, a pale gold dimmed by exhaustion, followed him, and for a moment, Jim swore he saw a flicker of the old Scout, the soldier who'd run through Afghan sands, fearless and loyal. But now, that soldier was a shadow, his body a testament to years of hunger, cold, and wounds untended. Jim's first task was to get help. He drove to Main Street, where Maple Grove Veterinary Care sat in a red brick building, its sign faded but welcoming. Sarah Bennett, the vet, was a woman in her late 50s, her gray-streaked hair pulled into a ponytail, her eyes carrying the quiet strength of someone who'd served as a medic in the Gulf War. She greeted Jim with a nod, but her face tightened as he carried Scout inside. "Lord, Jim, what happened to this dog?" she asked, her hands already moving to check Scout's pulse. Jim recounted the barn, the collar tag, the 7 years since Afghanistan. Sarah's expression softened at the name Scout, but her voice stayed professional. "He's in bad shape, severe malnutrition, systemic infection, nerve damage in that hind leg, and signs of PTSD. Dogs like him, combat ones, They carry it deep, just like us. She paused, meeting Jim's gaze. The kindest thing might be to let him go. Jim's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. He saved me 3 times, Sarah. In the desert, he was my brother. I owe him a chance. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the fear that he might lose Scout again, this time for good. Sarah nodded, respect in her gaze. All right, Jim. We'll fight for him. But it's gonna be a long road. She started in 4 drip, cleaned the infected wound on Scout's flank, and bandaged his broken leg. Take him home, keep him warm, try feeding small amounts of broth. I'll check in tomorrow. Jim thanked her, his throat tight, and carried Scout back to the truck, a small bag of supplies, antibiotics, gauze, a syringe for feeding tucked under his arm. Back at the farmhouse, Jim set up a vigil beside Scout. He warmed chicken broth on the stove, the savory scent mixing with the wood smoke from the fireplace. Using a syringe, he dribbled a few drops into Scout's mouth, watching anxiously as the dog's tongue moved faintly, swallowing. It was a small victory, but to Jim, it was everything. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his hand resting lightly on Scout's side, feeling the fragile heartbeat beneath the ribs. "You're a fighter, Scout," he whispered, his voice thick. "You made it this far. Don't give up now." Memories flooded back, Scout sprinting across a minefield, barking warnings. Scout's warm body pressed against him in a bunker, their breaths sinking in the cold. Those moments had anchored Jim through war, and now they fueled his resolve to anchor Scout back to life. Scout's condition was dire, a cruel map of his 7-year odyssey. His fur, once a proud gold, was now a patchwork of bald spots and scars, caked with dirt that Jim gently washed away with a warm cloth. The broken leg, likely shattered in the blast or a later injury, was stiff and useless, the muscles atrophied. His blind eye, clouded like a winter sky, gave him a ghostly look, but the good eye held a spark, faint but stubborn. Sarah had warned of PTSD, flinches at loud noises, tremors in sleep, and Jim saw it in Scout's restless twitches, as if he were still running from gunfire in his dreams. Yet, there were glimmers of hope. When Jim said Scout, the dog's ears twitched, and once, his tail gave a weak wag, a signal that somewhere inside, the soldier's spirit still burned. Days turned into weeks, and Jim's life became a rhythm of care. He fed Scout broth, then mashed rice with chicken, celebrating each bite. He massaged Scout's limbs to ease stiffness, his hands patient despite their ache. He built a wooden cart from scrap lumber, a simple frame with wheels from a neighbor's broken wagon, hoping Scout might one day move outside. Every night, he wrote in a worn journal, October 15th, Scout ate 2 spoons of rice. October 18th, tail wagged twice. The entries were his lifeline, proof that Scout was fighting inch by inch. Jin's own pain, grief, guilt, sleepless nights faded beside Scout's struggle. "You're saving me, buddy," he'd say, his voice cracking as Scout's eyes met his with quiet trust. Maple Grove watched from afar, its people whispering about Jim and his ghost dog. At the town's fall harvest festival, where the square buzzed with apple pie stands and a country band playing Sweet Home Alabama, Jim's absence was noted. He'd once been a fixture, sharing beers with veterans, but now his world was Scout. Yet one pair of eyes noticed more than most. Caleb Miller, a 10-year-old with tousled hair and a shy smile, lived next door with his mother, a night shift nurse. Caleb had seen Jim carry Scout home, the dog's frail form haunting him. At first, he was scared. Scout's blind eye and gaunt frame looked like something from a ghost story. But curiosity and a child's heart drew him closer. One crisp morning, as Jim sat on the porch reading aloud from a book on marine history, Caleb peeked through the fence, his sneakers scuffing the dirt. Jim noticed but said nothing, keeping his voice steady. In '03, we held a ridge under fire. Scout sniffed out a trap, saved us all. Caleb edged closer, sitting cross-legged on the grass, eyes wide. The next day, he brought a slice of cornbread wrapped in foil and slid it under the fence. For Scout, he mumbled, then darted away. Jim smiled, leaving the bread by Scout's blanket. When Scout sniffed it, his nose twitching, Jim felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. Caleb's visits grew bolder. He brought apples, peeled and sliced, and a tattered picture book about a dog named Max sitting beside Scout. He read in a halting voice. Max ran through the fields, chasing rabbits. Scout's ears flicked, and once he lifted his head, his good eye fixed on Caleb. Jim watched from the porch, his heart swelling. Caleb, too, was healing Scout, his innocence the balm for the dog's battered soul. One day, Caleb touched Scout's head, his hand trembling. "I ain't scared of you," he whispered. Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I trust you too." Jim wiped his eyes, seeing in Caleb the grandson he'd never had. Scout's progress was slow but undeniable. By November, he could sit, his body swaying but proud. When Jim said sit, his tail wagged more often, a faint arc that lit Jim's world. The cart, now padded with an old quilt, let Scout feel the sun, his nose twitching at the scent of grass. But the PTSD lingered. Thunder sent him trembling, and nightmares left him thrashing. Jim held him through those moments, whispering, "You're home, Scout. I'm here." Each step forward was a miracle, each setback a reminder of Scout's fragility. Yet, in those quiet hours, as Scout's breath steadied under Jim's hand, a bond forged in war grew stronger, a promise that neither would let the other fall. The old farmhouse creaked under the weight of a Tennessee autumn night, its tin roof still dripping into a bucket despite Jim Sullivan's plans to patch it. Inside, the glow of a fire cast shadows across the living room, where Scout lay on a wool blanket, his frail body curled like a question mark. Jim sat beside him, cross-legged on the hardwood floor, his hands resting lightly on Scout's side, feeling the faint heartbeat beneath sharp ribs. The radio hummed low, Patsy Cline's Walkin' After Midnight weaving through the air, a soft reminder of simpler times. Scout's good eye, a pale gold dimmed by years of hardship, followed Jim's movements, and though his breaths were shallow, they carried a stubborn will to live. Jim's heart ached with a mix of hope and fear, a hope that Scout could heal, fear that he'd slip away before they could reclaim what war had stolen. "You're home now, buddy," Jim whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We've got work to do, you and me." Scout's condition was a brutal testament to his 7-year ordeal. His once golden coat, proud and gleaming in Afghan sunlight, was now a patchwork of bald spots, scars, and caked dirt, his fur brittle as dried straw. His broken hind leg, likely shattered in the blast that tore him from Jim or worsened by a later injury, was stiff and useless, the muscles withered to stringy cords. One eye, clouded white like a winter fog, gave him a ghostly appearance, while the other held a faint spark, a flicker of the soldier's spirit that had once run through minefields. His ribs pressed sharp against his skin, each breath a labored heave, as if life was a battle he fought with every inhale. Sarah Bennett, the veterinarian at Maple Grove Veterinary Care, had diagnosed severe malnutrition, systemic infection, nerve damage, and combat-induced PTSD, flinches at sudden sounds, tremors in sleep, a haunted look that mirrored Jin's own. Yet, there were signs of resilience. When Jin said Scout, the dog's ears twitched, and once, his tail gave a weak wag, a signal that the warrior within hadn't surrendered. Jin's days became a rhythm of care, a devotion born of guilt and gratitude. He'd failed Scout once, letting him vanish in that Afghan blast, and he wouldn't fail him again. Each morning, he warmed chicken broth on the stove, the savory scent mingling with wood smoke from the fireplace. Using a syringe, he dribbled drops into Scout's mouth, his heart lifting when Scout's tongue moved, swallowing faintly. "That's it, buddy," Jim murmured, his voice a steady anchor. "One bite at a time." By the second week, Scout managed a spoonful of mashed rice mixed with broth, a small triumph that brought tears to Jim's eyes. He massaged Scout's limbs daily, his calloused hands gentle despite their ache, working to ease stiffness and stimulate blood flow. The broken leg, bandaged but immobile, pained Jim to look at, a reminder of Scout's suffering. He cleaned the infected wound on Scout's flank with antiseptic, wincing at the raw flesh, and changed the gauze with a soldier's precision. Jim's care extended beyond the physical. He spoke to Scout constantly, his voice a lifeline through the fog of trauma. "Remember that night in Kandahar?" he'd say, sitting by the fire. "You sniffed out a mine, saved the whole squad. Lay right by me after, like you knew I was scared." Scout's ears flicked at the familiar tone, and sometimes his "good I met Jim's," a quiet acknowledgement. Jim played the radio low, Willie Nelson's Blue Eyes crying in the rain, soothing Scout's tremors during thunderstorms, which sent him flinching as if gunfire echoed in his dreams. At night, when Scout thrashed in nightmares, Jim held him close, whispering, "You're safe, Scout. I'm here." The dog's trembling would ease, his breath steadying under Jim's touch, a bond forged in war now mending in peace. Jim's own wounds, grief, sleepless nights, the weight of surviving when others didn't, faded beside Scout's struggle. He felt guilt, sharp and relentless, for not finding Scout sooner, for believing he was dead. "I should have looked harder," he'd mutter, staring at the cigar box holding Scout's old tag. But hope grew, too, with each small victory. When Scout first wagged his tail twice in a day, Jim wrote in his journal, "October 20th, tail wagged, looked at me clear." He's fighting. The entries were his proof, a map of Scout's return. He built a wooden cart from scrap lumber, wheels scavenged from a neighbor's broken wagon, padded with an old quilt. "One day, you'll feel the sun again," he told Scout, adjusting the straps. The cart's out in use for now, but it was a promise, a future where Scout could move beyond the blanket. Maple Grove's Fall Harvest Festival came and went, the town square alive with apple pie stands, kids bobbing for apples, and a local band strumming Tennessee Waltz. Jim, once a regular at such events, sharing beers with veterans like Hank Thompson, was absent, his world now orbiting Scout. Whispers spread Jim's ghost dog, found half dead in the barn, a war hero no one expected to see again. Most kept their distance, respecting Jim's solitude, but one soul was drawn closer. Caleb Miller, a 10-year-old with tousled brown hair and a shy smile, lived next door with his mother, Lily, a night shift nurse at the county hospital. Caleb had glimpsed Jim carrying Scout home, the dog's skeletal form etched in his mind. At first, he was terrified. Scout's blind eye and gaunt frame looked like a creature from a campfire tale. But something in Jim's gentle care, the way he spoke to Scout like family, stirred Caleb's curiosity. One chilly morning, as Jim sat on the porch reading aloud from a tattered book on marine history, Caleb peeked through the split-rail fence, his sneakers scuffing the dirt. "In '03, we held a ridge under fire," Jim read, his voice steady. "Scout sniffed out a trap, saved us all." Caleb edged closer, sitting cross-legged on the grass, his eyes wide with wonder. Jim noticed, but kept reading, sensing the boy's fear and curiosity. The next day, Caleb brought a slice of cornbread, wrapped in foil, and slid it under the fence. For Scout, he mumbled, his cheeks red, before darting away. Jim smiled, placing the bread near Scout's blanket. When Scout sniffed it, his nose twitching with interest, Jim felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Looks like you got a friend, buddy," he said, his voice soft. Caleb's visits grew bolder, his fear giving way to empathy. He brought peeled apple slices, a toy truck missing a wheel, and a picture book about a dog named Max sitting beside Scout. He read in a halting voice. Max ran through the fields, chasing rabbits. Scout's ears flicked, and once he lifted his head, his good eye fixed on Caleb. Jim watched from the porch, his heart swelling. Caleb's innocence was a balm for Scout's battered soul, a light piercing the shadows of PTSD. One morning, Caleb reached out, his hand trembling, and touched Scout's head. "I ain't scared of you no more," he whispered. Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I trust you too." Jim wiped his eyes, seeing in Caleb the grandson he'd never had, a boy whose heart was helping Scout find his way back. Scout's recovery gained momentum, each milestone a beacon in the dark. By mid-November, he could sit, his body swaying but proud, when Jim said sit. His tail wagged more often, a faint arc that lit Jim's world. The wooden cart, now strapped gently to Scout's frame, let him roll outside, his nose twitching at the scent of grass and maple leaves. Jim pushed him along the fence line, the wheels creaking and Scout's ears perked at the coo of doves. But the PTSD lingered. Thunder sent him trembling, and nightmares left him thrashing, claws scraping the floor. Jim held him through those moments, his voice a steady mantra. "You're home, Scout. I'm here." Each step forward was a miracle, each setback a reminder of Scout's fragility. Yet in those quiet hours, as Scout's breath steadied under Jim's hand, their bond grew stronger, a promise that neither would let the other fall. The Tennessee autumn wove its golden threads through Maple Grove, where the hills glowed with amber and the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves. Inside Jim Sullivan's farmhouse, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over Scout, who lay on his wool blanket, a fragile figure fighting to reclaim life. The radio hummed low Johnny Cash's "I Walk the Line" drifting through the room, its steady rhythm a quiet companion to Jim's vigil. Scout's skeletal frame had gained a whisper of weight, his ribs less stark, but he remained a shadow of the warrior who'd once sprinted through Afghan sands. Jim sat beside him, his calloused hands resting lightly on Scout's side, feeling the faint heartbeat that anchored his hope. "You're coming back, buddy," he murmured, his voice warm but thick with emotion. One step at a time. Scout's good eye, a pale gold growing brighter, met Jim's, and in that gaze, a bond forged in war burned steady, a promise to carry each other through the dark. Scout's condition, though slowly improving, was a map of his 7-year ordeal. His fur, once a proud gold that caught the desert sun, was a patchwork of scars and bald spots, with faint new growth like spring grass pushing through cracked earth. His broken hind leg, bandaged tightly by Sarah Bennett, was a cruel relic likely shattered in the blast that tore him from Jim or worsened by a later injury, its muscles atrophied to mere cords. His blind eye, clouded like a Tennessee fog, gave him a spectral look, but the good eye held a growing clarity, a spark of the K-9 soldier who'd saved lives. His breaths, though less labored, came with a faint wheeze, and his ribs still pressed against his skin, a reminder of years spent scavenging. Sarah's diagnosis, severe malnutrition, systemic infection, nerve damage, and combat PTSD lingered in Jim's mind. Scout flinched at loud noises, trembled in sleep, and carried a haunted gaze that mirrored Jim's own sleepless nights. Yet resilience shone through. When Jim said Scout, the dog's ears twitched, and his tail, thin and ragged, wagged faintly, a signal that the warrior within was stirring. Jim's caregiving was a labor of love, driven by guilt for losing Scout and gratitude for their reunion. He rose each dawn, brewing coffee as the farmhouse creaked under the weight of mourning. On the stove, he warmed chicken broth, its savory scent mingling with wood smoke from the fireplace. He fed Scout with a syringe, dribbling broth into his mouth, his heart lifting when Scout's tongue flicked, swallowing with effort. "That's my boy," Jim said, his voice a steady anchor. By late October, Scout managed a spoonful of mashed rice and chicken, a milestone Jim celebrated with a rare smile. He wrote in his journal, October 25th, ate 4 spoons of rice. Tail wagged twice. The entries were his proof, a map of Scout's return from the edge. Jim massaged Scout's limbs daily, his hands gentle despite their ache, working to ease stiffness and stimulate blood flow. The broken leg pained Jim to touch, its unnatural angle a reminder of Scout's suffering. He cleaned the infected wound on Scout's flank with antiseptic, wincing at the raw flesh, and changed the gauze with a Marine's precision. Beyond physical care, Jim tended to Scout's wounded spirit. He spoke constantly, his voice a lifeline through the fog of trauma. "Remember Kandahar, buddy," he'd say, sitting by the fire.
"You sniffed out a mine, saved the squad. Lay right by me after, like you knew I was scared." Scout's ears flicked at the familiar tone, and sometimes his "good I met Jim's," a quiet acknowledgement. To soothe Scout's PTSD, Jim kept the radio on, playing Willie Nelson's "Always on My Mind" or Loretta Lynn's "Coal Miner's Daughter" to drown out
thunderstorms that sent Scout trembling, as if gunfire echoed in his dreams. At night, when Scout thrashed in nightmares, claws scraping the floor, Jim held him close, whispering, "You're home, Scout. No more bombs." The dog's tremors eased, his breath steadying under Jim's touch, their bond a bridge across 7 years of loss. Jim's own pain, grief for fallen comrades, guilt for surviving, sleepless nights haunted by war, faded beside Scout's struggle. He felt a sharp pang for not searching harder for Scout, for accepting McKeo's report. "I should have found you," he'd mutter, staring at the cigar box holding Scout's old tag, its dented edge a memory of their first training day. But hope grew with each milestone. When Scout first sat up, his body swaying but proud, at the command, "Sit," Jim's eyes welled. "Still my soldier," he said, his voice cracking. He built a wooden cart from scrap lumber, wheels from a neighbor's broken wagon, padded with his mother's old quilt. "You'll feel the grass again," he promised, adjusting the straps. The cart was a vision of a future where Scout could move beyond the blanket, a symbol of their shared fight. Scout's recovery gained momentum, each step a beacon in the dark. By early November, he ate a full bowl of rice and chicken, his weight creeping up, his fur showing faint glints of gold. His good eye grew brighter, tracking Jim's movements with trust. When Jim said search, Scout's nose twitched, a reflex from their K9 days, and his tail wagged twice, a small arc that lit Jim's world. But PTSD lingered. A slammed door sent Scout flinching, his body curling tight, and nightmares left him thrashing. Jim learned to move softly, to speak low, mirroring the calm he'd used in war. Each night, he read from a Marine history book, his voice weaving stories. "You saved us on that ridge, Scout." "Always did." Scout leaned into Jim's hand, a silent acknowledgement that he remembered. Maple Grove's Fall Harvest Festival filled the town square with laughter, apple pie stands, and a band playing Tennessee Waltz. Jim, once a regular, sharing beers with veterans like Hank Thompson, was absent, his world now Scout's blanket. Whispers spread about Jim's ghost dog, a war hero found half dead. Most kept their distance, but Caleb Miller, a 10-year-old with tousled hair and a shy smile, was drawn closer. Living next door with his mother, Lily, a night shift nurse, Caleb had glimpsed Jim carrying Scout home, the dog's gaunt frame haunting him. At first, he was scared. Scout's blind eye and skeletal form looked spectral. But Jim's care, the way he spoke to Scout like family, stirred Caleb's heart. One morning, as Jim read aloud on the porch, Caleb peeked through the fence, his sneakers scuffing the dirt. "Scout saved the squad," Jim read, his voice steady. Caleb sat cross-legged on the grass, eyes wide, fear giving way to wonder. Jim noticed, but kept reading, sensing the boy's heart opening. The next day, Caleb brought a slice of cornbread, wrapped in foil, and slid it under the fence. For Scout, he mumbled, blushing before darting away. Jim smiled, placing the bread near Scout's blanket. When Scout sniffed it, his nose twitching, Jim felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Got a friend," he said, his voice soft. Caleb's visits grew frequent, his fear melting into empathy. He brought peeled apple slices, a toy truck with a missing wheel, and a picture book about a dog named Max. Sitting by Scout, he read in a halting voice. Max chased rabbits. Scout's ears flicked, and once he lifted his head, his good eye fixed on Caleb. Jim watched from the porch, his heart swelling. Caleb's innocence was a balm for Scout's trauma. One day, Caleb reached out, his hand trembling, and touched Scout's head. "I ain't scared," he whispered. Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I trust you." Jim wiped his eyes, seeing in Caleb the grandson he'd never had. By late November, Scout's progress was undeniable. He sat steadily at sit, his tail wagging daily. Jim strapped the cart to Scout's frame, pushing him along the fence line, the wheels creaking over grass. Scout's nose twitched at maple leaves, his ears perking at doves. Caleb ran alongside, laughing, a sound that brightened Scout's eye. But setbacks came. Thunder sent Scout trembling, and nightmares left him thrashing. Jim and Caleb held him, their voices a chorus. "You're safe." Each step was a miracle, each setback a reminder of Scout's fragility. In those quiet hours, as Scout's breath steadied, their bond grew stronger, a promise to carry each other home. The Tennessee autumn deepened in Maple Grove, where the hills glowed with amber and the air carried the crisp scent of maple leaves scattered across red clay earth. Inside Jim Sullivan's farmhouse, the fire crackled, casting a warm glow over Scout, who lay on a wool blanket by the hearth, his frail body a fragile testament to survival. The radio hummed softly, Dolly Parton's Jolene weaving through the room, its plaintive notes echoing the quiet hope in Jim's heart. Scout's skeletal frame had gained a whisper of weight, his ribs less stark beneath patchy fur, but he remained a shadow of the K-9 warrior who'd once sprinted through Afghan sands. Jim sat cross-legged beside him, his calloused hands resting lightly on Scout's side, feeling the faint heartbeat that anchored his days. "You're coming back to me, buddy," he murmured, his voice warm but thick with emotion. Scout's good eye, a pale gold growing brighter, met Jim's, and in that gaze, a bond forged in war burned steady, a vow to carry each other through the shadows of loss. Scout's condition, though inching toward recovery, was a stark map of his 7-year ordeal. His fur, once a proud gold that caught the desert sun, was a tattered quilt of scars, bald spots, and caked dirt, with faint new growth like spring grass pushing through cracked earth. His broken hind leg, bandaged tightly by Sarah Bennett at Maple Grove Veterinary Care, was a cruel relic likely shattered in the blast that tore him from Jim or worsened by a later trauma, its muscles withered to stringy cords. His blind eye, clouded like a Tennessee fog, gave him a spectral look, but the good eye held a growing clarity, a spark of the soldier who'd saved lives. His breaths, though less labored, came with a faint wheeze, and his ribs still pressed against his skin, a reminder of years spent scavenging for scraps. Sarah's diagnosis lingered: severe malnutrition, systemic infection, nerve damage, and combat PTSD, flinches at sudden noises, tremors in sleep, a haunted gaze that mirrored Jim's own sleepless nights. Yet resilience shone through. When Jim said "Scout," the dog's ears twitched, and his tail, thin and ragged, wagged faintly, a signal that the warrior within was stirring. Jim's caregiving was a devotion born of guilt, gratitude, and love. He'd lost Scout once, believing him dead in that Afghan blast, and the weight of that failure drove him now. Each morning, he rose before dawn, brewing coffee as the farmhouse creaked under the weight of morning. On the stove, he warmed chicken broth, its savory scent mingling with wood smoke from the fireplace. He fed Scout with a syringe, dribbling broth into his mouth, his heart lifting when Scout's tongue flicked, swallowing with effort. "That's my boy," Jim said, his voice a steady anchor. By late October, Scout managed a spoonful of mashed rice mixed with chicken, a milestone Jim celebrated with a rare smile. He wrote in his journal, its pages worn from nightly entries, October 25th, ate 4 spoons of rice, tail wagged twice. The entries were as proof, a map of Scouts returned from the edge. Jim's care extended beyond sustenance. He massaged Scout's limbs daily, his calloused hands moving gently to ease stiffness and stimulate blood flow. The broken leg pained Jim to touch, its unnatural angle a reminder of Scout's suffering. He cleaned the infected wound on Scout's flank with antiseptic, wincing at the raw flesh, and changed the gauze with a Marine's precision. Scout flinched at first, his body tensing, but Jim's soft voice easy. "Buddy, I've got you," calmed him. To soothe Scout's PTSD, Jim kept the radio on, playing Willie Nelson's Always on My Mind or Loretta Lynn's Coal Miner's Daughter to drown out thunderstorms that sent Scout trembling, as if gunfire echoed in his dreams. At night, when Scout thrashed in nightmares, claws scraping the floor, Jim held him close, whispering, "You're home, Scout. No more bonds." The dog's tremors eased, his breath steadying under Jim's touch, their bond a bridge across 7 years of loss. Jim's own wounds, grief for fallen comrades, guilt for surviving, sleepless nights haunted by war, faded beside Scout's struggle. He felt a sharp pang for not searching harder for Scout, for accepting the Kia report. "I should have found you," he'd mutter, staring at the cigar box holding Scout's old tag, its dented edge a memory of their first training day. But hope grew with each milestone. When Scout first sat up, his body swaying but proud, at the command, "Sit," Jim's eyes welled. "Still my soldier," he said, his voice cracking. He built a wooden cart from scrap lumber, wheels scavenged from a neighbor's broken wagon, padded with his mother's old quilt. "You'll feel the grass again," he promised, adjusting the straps. The cart was a vision of a future where Scout could move beyond the blanket, a symbol of their shared fight. Scout's recovery gained momentum, each step a beacon in the dark. By early November, he ate a full bowl of rice and chicken, his weight creeping up, his fur showing faint glints of gold. His good eye grew brighter, tracking Jim's movements with trust. When Jim said search, Scout's nose twitched, a reflex from their K-9 days, and his tail wagged twice, a small arc that lit Jim's world. But PTSD lingered. A slammed door sent Scout flinching, his body curling tight, and nightmares left him thrashing. Jim learned to move softly, to speak low, mirroring the calm he'd used in war to steady his squad. Each night, he read from a Marine history book, his voice weaving stories. "You saved us on that ridge, Scout." "Always did." Scout leaned into Jim's hand, a silent acknowledgement that he remembered. The turning point came in mid-November, a crisp morning when the frost glittered on Maple Grove's fields. Jim strapped the cart to Scout's frame, its wheels creaking as he guided it to the porch. "Let's try this, buddy," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Scout's body tensed, his good eye wide with uncertainty, but Jim's steady hand reassured him. With a trembling effort, Scout pushed with his front legs, the cart rolling forward an inch, then 2. His tail wagged, a faint but joyful arc, and Jim's heart soared. "That's it, Scout," he exclaimed, his voice breaking. He pushed the cart along the fence line, the grass crunching underfoot, and Scout's nose twitched at the scent of maple leaves, his ears perking at the coo of doves. For the first time since the barn, Scout seemed alive, not just surviving but reaching for the world again. Jim's hope swelled, but he knew Scout's journey was fragile. A week later, a thunderstorm rolled in, its thunder cracking like artillery. Scout trembled, his body curling tight, his good eye wild with fear. Jim knelt beside him, holding him close, his voice a steady mantra. "You're safe, Scout." "I'm here." The radio played Hank Williams' "I Saw the Light," its gospel notes a quiet prayer. As the storm passed, Scout's tremors eased, and he leaned into Jim's hand, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I'm trying." Jim's eyes stung, a mix of pride and pain. He saw himself in Scout, a survivor haunted by war, fighting to find peace. "We'll get there together," he whispered, his voice thick. Maple Grove's Fall Harvest Festival filled the town square with laughter, apple pie stands, and a local band strumming Sweet Home Alabama. Jim, once a regular at such events, sharing beers with veterans like Hank Thompson, was absent, his world now Scout's blanket by the fire. Whispers spread about Jim's ghost dog, a war hero found half dead in the barn. Most folks kept their distance, respecting Jim's solitude, but one heart was drawn closer. Caleb Miller, a 10-year-old with tousled brown hair and a shy smile, lived next door with his mother, Lily, a night shift nurse at the county hospital. Caleb had glimpsed Jim carrying Scout home, the dog's skeletal form haunting him. At first, he was terrified Scout's blind eye and gaunt frame looked like a specter from a campfire tale. But Jim's gentle care, the way he spoke to Scout like family, stirred something in Caleb, a child's curiosity, a need to understand. One chilly morning, as Jim sat on the porch reading aloud from a tattered book on marine history, Caleb peeked through the split-rail fence, his sneakers scuffing the dirt. In '03, we held a ridge under fire, Jim read, his voice steady. Scout sniffed out a trap, saved us all. Caleb edged closer, sitting cross-legged on the grass, his eyes wide with wonder. Jim noticed, but kept reading, sensing the boy's fear giving way to fascination. The next day, Caleb brought a slice of cornbread, wrapped in foil, and slid it under the fence. For Scout, he mumbled, his cheeks red, before darting away. Jim smiled, placing the bread near Scout's blanket. When Scout sniffed it, his nose twitching with interest, Jim felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Looks like you got a friend, buddy," he said, his voice soft. Caleb's visits became a daily ritual, his fear melting into a quiet empathy that surprised even Jim. The boy brought peeled apple slices, a toy truck with a missing wheel, and a tattered picture book about a dog named Max sitting beside Scout. He read in a halting voice. Max ran through the fields, chasing rabbits. Scout's ears flicked, and once he lifted his head, his good eye fixed on Caleb with a curiosity that hadn't been there before. Jim watched from the porch, his heart swelling. Caleb's innocence was a balm for Scout's battered soul, a light piercing the shadows of war's trauma. The boy's presence seemed to coax Scout out of his shell, his tail wagging a little longer each day, his body relaxing under Caleb's gentle words. One crisp December morning, Caleb arrived with a gift that stopped Jim in his tracks, a small wooden toy dog, clumsily carved with a pocket knife, its edges sanded smooth. "It's Scout," Caleb said, his voice shy but proud, holding it out. "So he knows he's strong." Jim's throat tightened, his eyes stinging as he took the toy, turning it over in his hands. The carving was rough, but the care in each notch was unmistakable. He placed it by Scout's blanket, and when Scout sniffed it, his good eye brightened, his tail giving a firm wag. "He likes it, Caleb," Jim said, his voice thick. Caleb beamed, sitting cross-legged beside Scout, and for the first time, he reached out, his hand trembling, to touch Scout's head. "I ain't scared of you no more," he whispered, his voice small but brave. Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I trust you too." Jim turned away, wiping his eyes, seeing in Caleb the grandson he'd never had, a boy whose heart was helping Scout find his way back to life. Caleb's role grew beyond visits. One afternoon, he arrived with a sketch on crumpled notebook paper, a design for an improved cart for Scout, with softer wheels and a padded harness. "So he can go farther," Caleb explained, his eyes earnest. Jim studied the sketch, marveling at the boy's thoughtfulness. "You're a regular engineer, kid," he said, ruffling Caleb's hair. Together, they worked in the barn, Jim sawing wood, Caleb sanding edges, their laughter mingling with the scent of sawdust. Sarah Bennett stopped by to check Scout's progress and offered advice on the harness, her medic's precision guiding their adjustments. When they fitted the new cart, Scout pushed forward with his front legs, the wheels rolling smoothly, his tail wagging with a vigor Jim hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Caleb clapped, his face alight, and Scout's good eye sparkled, as if he felt the boy's joy. Scout's milestones multiplied, each one a miracle carved from pain. By mid-December, he could stand briefly without the cart, his front legs trembling but resolute at the command, "Stand." His weight had climbed, his fur regaining a soft sheen, the scars less stark against new gold. When Jim said search, Scout's nose twitched, and he dragged himself an inch forward, a reflex from their K, 9 days that brought tears to Jim's eyes. "You're still in there," he whispered, his voice breaking. Scout's PTSD, though persistent, grew less severe. A slammed door no longer sent him cowering, though thunder still made him tremble. Jim and Caleb learned to anticipate his triggers, moving softly, speaking low. During nightmares, Caleb would sit by Scout, reading from his Max book, his voice a gentle tether. Max slept by the fire, safe and warm. Scout's tremors eased, his good eye fixed on Caleb, a trust that grew with each story. Jin's emotional arc deepened alongside Scout's recovery. The guilt that had gnawed at him for not finding Scout, for surviving when others didn't, began to soften, replaced by a quiet pride in Scout's fight. Each milestone felt like a shared victory, a chance to rewrite the past. Caleb's presence stirred something new in Jim, a paternal warmth he hadn't felt since his own son, estranged and distant, had left years ago. Watching Caleb read to Scout, Jim saw a grandson he'd never had, a boy whose heart was healing them both. "You're good for him, kid," Jim told Caleb one evening, his voice gruff but warm. Caleb grinned, his eyes bright, and Jim felt a flicker of family, a gift he hadn't expected. Maple Grove's winter approached, the town square now strung with Christmas lights, the air filled with carols and the scent of hot cider. Jim remained absent from the festivities, his world centered on Scout and Caleb. Hank Thompson stopped by once, bringing a thermos of coffee and a gruff, "Heard about your dog, Jim. Tough son of a gun, like you." Jim nodded, his smile faint but genuine. The town's whispers about the ghost dog grew softer, replaced by a quiet respect. Caleb's mother, Lily, sent a plate of pecan pie, a note tucked inside. "Thank you for giving Caleb something to believe in." Jim read it by the fire, his eyes stinging, and placed it in the cigar box with Scout's tag, a new relic of their journey. By Christmas Eve, Scout's recovery reached a new peak. Jim and Caleb took him outside in the cart, the frost glittering under a clear sky. Scout pushed forward, the wheels rolling smoothly, his nose twitching at the scent of pine from a neighbor's tree. Caleb ran alongside, laughing, his breath puffing in the cold. Scout's tail wagged firmly, his good eye bright with a joy Jim hadn't seen since their war days. "Look at you, Scout," Jim said, his voice thick with pride. Caleb knelt beside Scout, stroking his head, and whispered, "You're my hero." Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, a bond forged not in battle but in love. The winter of 2012 crept into Maple Grove, Tennessee, dusting the hills with frost and wrapping the town in a quiet hush. Inside Jim Sullivan's farmhouse, the fire crackled, its warmth battling the chill that seeped through the leaky roof. Scout lay on his wool blanket by the hearth, his frail body gaining a faint solidity, his ribs less stark beneath a coat that showed glimmers of gold. The radio played softly, Hank Williams' "I Saw the Light," filling the room with gospel hope, a fitting backdrop for the slow miracle unfolding. Jim sat beside Scout, his calloused hands resting lightly on the dog's side, feeling the steady heartbeat that had become his anchor. "You're a fighter, buddy," he murmured, his voice warm but thick with emotion. Scout's good eye, a pale gold now bright with life, met Jim's, and in that gaze, a bond forged in the fires of Afghanistan burned stronger, a vow to carry each other home. Scout's recovery was a testament to resilience, each milestone a hard-won victory against the scars of 7 years lost. His fur, once a tattered patchwork of scars and bald spots, began to regain its sheen, new gold threads weaving through the old wounds like spring grass and cracked earth. His broken hind leg, bandaged tightly by Sarah Bennett, remained a cruel relic likely shattered in the blast that tore him from Jim or worsened by a later trauma, its muscles atrophied to cords. Sarah had warned it might never heal, but Jim refused to give up. He massaged the leg daily, his hands gentle despite their ache, working to ease stiffness and stimulate blood flow. The infected wound on Scout's flank, once raw and angry, closed under Jim's meticulous care, the antiseptic sting softened by his soothing voice. "Easy, buddy, we're almost done." Scout's blind eye, clouded like a winter fog, gave him a spectral look, but his good eye grew clearer, a window to the soldier's spirit within. By mid-December, Scout's physical progress was undeniable. He ate a full bowl of rice and chicken each day, his weight climbing slowly, his ribs no longer sharp against his skin. Jen celebrated each bite, his journal filling with entries. December 10th, ate a whole bowl. Tail wagged 3 times. The syringe was retired, replaced by a small ceramic dish Jim had found in a cupboard, chipped but sturdy. Scout's breaths lost their wheeze, his chest rising with a quiet strength. When Jim said sit, Scout pushed up, his body steady, no longer swaying, his front legs firm as he held the pose. "That's my soldier," Jim said, his voice cracking with pride. The wooden cart, crafted from scrap lumber and padded with Jim's mother's quilt, became a daily ritual. Jim strapped it to Scout's frame, the wheels scavenged from a neighbor's broken wagon, creaking as they rolled across the porch. Scout pushed with his front legs, the cart gliding over grass, his nose twitching at the scent of frost and pine. His tail wagged firmly, a joyful arc that lit Jim's world. A pivotal milestone came on a crisp December morning when the fields glittered under a thin frost. Jim took Scout outside, the cart rolling along the fence line, and said, "Stand." Scout's ears perked, his good eye locking on Jim's face. With a trembling effort, he pushed up, his front legs quivering but resolute, lifting his body without the cart's support for the first time. He held the pose for seconds, his tail wagging, before sinking back, exhausted but triumphant. Jim knelt beside him, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You did it, Scout," he whispered, his voice thick. "You're coming back." He wrote in his journal, December 15th, stood alone, looked at me like he knew. The moment felt like a reclaiming, a piece of the warrior Scout had been returning to the world. Scout's physical recovery wasn't without setbacks. Cold snaps stiffened his joints, and the broken leg ached, drawing soft whines that pained Jim to hear. Sarah visited weekly, adjusting the bandages and prescribing a low-dose painkiller mixed into Scout's food. "He's stronger than most," she said, her Gulf War medic's eyes softening. "But go slow, Jim. He's still fragile." Jim nodded, his resolve unwavering. He adapted the cart, adding softer wheels from a donated stroller, and pushed Scout farther each day, past the fence to the edge of the wheat field. Scout's nose twitched at the scent of frozen earth, his ears perking at doves cooing in the bare trees. Each outing was a step toward life, a defiance of the barn where Jim had found him, broken and forgotten. Scout's emotional recovery was a slower, more delicate dance, shaped by the trauma of war and years alone. His PTSD, diagnosed by Sarah as combat-induced, manifested in flinches at loud noises, tremors in sleep, and a haunted gaze that mirrored Jim's own. A slammed door sent Scout curling tight, his body trembling as if expecting gunfire. Thunderstorms were worse, his good eye wild with fear, his claws scraping the floor. Jim learned to anticipate these triggers, moving softly, speaking low, mirroring the calm he'd used in Afghanistan to steady his squad. He kept the radio on, playing Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues or Patsy Cline's Crazy to soothe Scout's nerves. During nightmares, Jim held him close, whispering, "You're home, Scout. No bombs." Scout's tremors eased, his breath steadying, a trust rebuilt through Jin's unwavering presence. Jin's voice became Scout's lifeline, a tether to the past they'd shared. Each evening, he read from a tattered marine history book, his voice weaving stories of their war days. "You remember that ridge in '03? You sniffed out a mine, saved us all. Lay by me after like you knew I was scared." Scout's ears flicked, and sometimes he leaned into Jim's hand, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I remember." The command search sparked a reflex. Scout's nose twitched, his body shifting an inch forward, a glimpse of the K-9 soldier who'd once led the way. Jim's heart swelled at these moments, but he tempered his hope, knowing Scout's spirit was still fragile. "We'll get there," he'd murmur, stroking Scout's head, feeling the new fur soft under his fingers. Caleb Miller, the 10-year-old neighbor with tousled hair and a shy smile, became an unexpected key to Scout's emotional healing. Living next door with his mother, Lily, a night shift nurse, Caleb had been terrified by Scout's gaunt frame and blind eye when Jim first brought him home. But Jin's gentle care stirred Caleb's curiosity, and his daily visits wove a new thread into Scout's recovery. Caleb's innocence was a balm, his presence a light piercing the shadows of Scout's trauma. Each morning, he arrived with small gifts, peeled apple slices, a toy truck with a missing wheel, a tattered picture book about a dog named Max sitting cross-legged beside Scout. He read in a halting voice. Max ran through the fields, chasing rabbits. Scout's ears flicked, and his good eye fixed on Caleb, a curiosity growing where fear once lingered. Caleb's breakthrough came on a December afternoon, when the sky was a pale blue and the air sharp with frost. He arrived with a clumsily carved wooden toy dog, its edges sanded smooth, a gift made with his pocket knife. "It's Scout," he said, his voice shy but proud, holding it out. Jim's throat tightened, his eyes stinging as he took the toy, turning it over in his hands. The carving was rough, but the care in each notch was unmistakable. He placed it by Scout's blanket, and when Scout sniffed it, his good eye brightened, his tail giving a firm wag. "He likes it, Caleb," Jim said, his voice thick. Caleb beamed, sitting beside Scout, and reached out, his hand trembling, to touch the dog's head. "I ain't scared no more," he whispered, his voice small but brave. Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, as if saying, "I trust you too." Jim turned away, wiping his eyes, seeing in Caleb the grandson he'd never had, a boy whose heart was healing Scout's spirit. Caleb's role grew beyond gifts. He sketched a design for an improved cart on crumpled notebook paper with softer wheels and a padded harness. "So Scout can go farther," he explained, his eyes earnest. Jim studied the sketch, marveling at the boy's thoughtfulness. "You're a regular engineer, kid," he said, ruffling Caleb's hair. Together, they worked in the barn, Jim sawing wood, Caleb sanding edges, their laughter mingling with sawdust. Sarah stopped by, offering advice on the harness, her medic's precision guiding their adjustments. When they fitted the new cart, Scout pushed forward, the wheels rolling smoothly, his tail wagging with vigor. Caleb clapped, his face alight, and Scout's good eye sparkled, as if he felt the boy's joy. Caleb's journey from fear to empathy was a quiet transformation, shaped by Scout's vulnerability and Jim's steadfast care. At first, Scout's gaunt frame and blind eye had haunted Caleb, a specter from a ghost story. But watching Jim feed Scout, speak to him like family, and build the cart sparked a curiosity that overrode fear. Caleb's daily visits became a ritual, his small gifts a bridge to Scout's heart. The cornbread slice, the apple slices, the Max book, each was a gesture of courage, a child's way of saying, "I see you." Scout's responses, ear flicks, head lifts, tail wags, gave Caleb confidence, his shy smile growing bolder with each interaction. The wooden toy dog marked a turning point, a symbol of Caleb's acceptance. Carving it had taken hours, his fingers blistered from the knife, but the pride in his eyes as he gave it to Scout was worth it. When Scout leaned into his touch, Caleb felt a connection he hadn't known before, a sense of purpose, like he was helping a hero heal. His mother, Lily, noticed the change. Caleb, once quiet and withdrawn, now talked animatedly about Scout, his eyes bright with stories. "He's a soldier, Mom," he'd say, clutching the Max book. Lily sent Jim a plate of pecan pie, a note tucked inside. "Thank you for giving Caleb something to believe in." Jim read it by the fire, his heart full, and placed it in the cigar box with Scout's tag. Caleb's empathy deepened as he joined Jim in Scout's care. He helped push the cart, running alongside as Scout rolled through the frost, laughing when Scout's nose twitched at a squirrel scamper. He read to Scout daily, his voice steadier now, the Max stories a ritual that calmed Scout's tremors. When thunder struck, Caleb sat by Scout, his small hand stroking the dog's head, whispering, "It's okay, Scout. I'm here." Scout's good eye fixed on him, a trust that mirrored his bond with Jim. Caleb's sketch for the new cart was a labor of love, drawn late at night by flashlight. Working with Jim in the barn, he felt grown up, his laughter a rare gift in Jim's quiet life. "We're a team," Caleb said, sanding a wheel, and Jim nodded, his heart swelling. Jim's emotional journey was a quiet reckoning, shaped by Scout's fight and Caleb's presence. The guilt that had gnawed at him for not finding Scout, for surviving when others didn't, began to soften, replaced by pride in Scout's resilience. Each milestone felt like a shared victory, a chance to rewrite the past. "You're saving me, buddy," Jim would say, stroking Scout's head, his voice thick. Caleb's arrival stirred a paternal warmth Jim hadn't felt since his estranged son left years ago. Watching Caleb read to Scout, Jim saw a grandson he'd never had, a boy whose heart was healing them both. "You're good for him, kid," Jim told Caleb one evening, his voice gruff but warm. Caleb grinned, and Jim felt a flicker of family, a gift he hadn't expected. Jim's hope grew, tempered by the fragility of Scout's recovery. He knew the road was long, Scout's leg might never heal, his PTSD might linger, but each step forward was a miracle. The cart outings, the tail wags, Caleb's laughter, they were proof that life could begin again, even after war's devastation. Jim's sleepless nights grew fewer, his dreams less haunted by gunfire. He found himself humming along to the radio, Merle Haggard's "My Tennessee Home," a quiet anthem. Hank Thompson stopped by, bringing coffee and a gruff, "Your dog's tough, Jim." "Like you," Jim nodded, his smile genuine, a sign of healing. On Christmas Eve, Maple Grove glowed with lights strung across the square, carols drifting from the church. Jim and Caleb took Scout outside in the new cart, the frost glittering under a clear sky. Scout pushed forward, the wheels rolling smoothly, his nose twitching at the scent of pine from a neighbor's tree. Caleb ran alongside, laughing, his breath puffing in the cold. Scout's tail wagged firmly, his good eye bright with joy. Jim knelt beside him, tears in his eyes. "Look at you, Scout," he said, his voice thick. Caleb stroked Scout's head, whispering, "You're my hero." Scout leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping, a bond forged in love. Inside, by the fire, Jim gave Caleb a small gift, a pocket knife with a carved handle, like the one Caleb used for the toy dog. "For our engineer," Jim said, his voice gruff. Caleb's eyes widened, his grin lighting the room. They sat by Scout, the radio playing Silent Night, and Jim read from the Max book, his voice blending with Caleb's. Scout's good eye closed, his breath steady, his tail giving a final wag. In that moment, the farmhouse felt like home, a sanctuary for three souls healing together. The winter of 2012 settled over Maple Grove, Tennessee, like a quiet hymn, its frosty breath dusting the fields and dimming the glow of Christmas lights in the town square. Inside Jim Sullivan's farmhouse, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the living room where Scout rested on his wool blanket. The radio, ever present, played Merle Haggard's My Tennessee Home softly, its notes a gentle reminder of roots that held fast. Scout, no longer the skeletal ghost Jim had found in the barn, had gained weight, his fur a patchwork of new gold over old scars. His good eye, a pale gold now bright with life, followed Jim's movements, and his tail gave a faint wag at the sound of his name. The wooden cart Jim and Caleb had built stood by the door, its wheels worn from daily outings, a symbol of Scout's hard-won return. Jim sat in his recliner, a marine history book open on his lap, his weathered face softened by a rare peace. "You've come a long way, buddy," he said, his voice warm. But the night, still and cold, held a darkness neither man nor dog could foresee. Scout's recovery had been a slow miracle, his body and spirit mending under Jim's care and Caleb's gentle friendship. His broken hind leg, bandaged but stiff, remained a reminder of his 7-year ordeal, and his blind eye gave him a spectral look, but his strength was undeniable. He could sit and stand at Jim's commands, his tail wagging daily, and the cart let him roam the yard, nose twitching at the scent of frost. His PTSD lingered, thunder sent him trembling, nightmares left him thrashing, but Jim and Caleb's voices were a tether, pulling him back to safety. Caleb, the 10-year-old neighbor whose fear had turned to love, was now a fixture, his laughter a light in Scout's world. Yet, beneath the quiet of Maple Grove, a threat loomed, one that would test Scout's courage and the bonds forged in healing. It was past midnight when the farmhouse fell silent, the fire reduced to embers, the radio off. Jim slept in his recliner. The book slipped to the floor, his snores soft in the stillness. Scout lay on his blanket, his good eye half closed, his breath steady but alert, a soldier's instinct never fully at rest. Outside, the wind whispered through bare trees, masking the faint crunch of boots on frozen grass. A shadow moved near the barn, a figure wrapped in dark cloth, his eyes scanning the farmhouse. He knew Jim lived alone, a retired Marine with relics of war, medals, a knife engraved with a unit number, tactical maps prized by collectors on the black market. The intruder had watched for weeks, noting Jim's absence from town, the quiet of the farm. Tonight, with the town asleep, he'd strike. The intruder pried open the barn's side window, its glass shattering with a tinkle lost in the wind. He slipped inside, his boots muffled by cloth wraps, and crossed to the farmhouse's back door. A lock clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing the dark kitchen. He moved with practiced stealth, his flashlight beam sweeping the room, landing on a wooden cabinet by the fireplace where Jim kept his treasures. Scout's ears twitched, his good eye snapping open, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The sound was faint, but it stirred Jim, his snores pausing. Scout's body tensed, his broken legs stiff, but his instincts sharp, honed by years in war and survival. He didn't bark, barking was for warning, and this was a fight. The intruder reached the cabinet, his gloved hands prying at the lock. Scout rose, his front legs trembling, his body low despite the pain in his hind leg. The growl deepened, a warning the intruder ignored, too focused on his prize. In a flash, Scout lunged, his frail frame propelled by a courage that defied his injuries. He struck the intruder's side, teeth sinking into the man's arm, the force sending them crashing into the coffee table. The intruder screamed, a raw sound that shattered the night, his flashlight clattering to the floor. Jim jolted awake, his marine reflexes kicking in, but before he could stand, the intruder swung a short iron bar, catching Jim's temple. Blood trickled down his face as he slumped back unconscious, his hand reaching instinctively for Scout. Scout didn't falter. The intruder thrashed, pulling a small knife from his belt, its blade glinting in the dim light. He stabbed wildly, the knife slicing into Scout's hip, drawing a yelp of pain. Blood seeped through Scout's fur, but his jaws tightened, dragging the man to the floor. The intruder kicked, his boots striking Scout's ribs, but Scout held fast, his good eye burning with a soldier's resolve. No one touches my brother. The struggle woke the neighbors, their porch lights flickering on. Caleb, unable to sleep, saw the glow through his window and ran to his mother, Lily, shouting, "Something's wrong at Mr. Jim's." Lily called the sheriff, her voice shaking. Within minutes, police lights flashed through the farmhouse windows, sirens piercing the night. Deputies burst through the door, their flashlights sweeping the chaos. Jim slumped in the recliner, blood on his face. The intruder pinned beneath Scout, his arm bloodied. Scout, soaked in blood, his breath ragged, but his jaws unyielding. "Stand back," a deputy shouted, but his voice softened at the sight of Scout, a dog half dead yet holding the line. They cuffed the intruder, dragging him out, his screams fading. A deputy knelt by Scout, his hand hovering, unsure. "Easy, boy," he said, his voice low. Scout released his grip, collapsing beside Jim, his good eye fixed on his master, a faint whine escaping as if to say, "I kept you safe." Paramedics arrived, their boots heavy on the hardwood. They lifted Jim onto a stretcher, his pulse faint but steady, a bruise blooming on his temple. Caleb and Lily stood at the door, Caleb's eyes wide with fear, clutching his mother's hand. "Is Mr. Jim okay?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Lily squeezed his hand, her own heart racing. The medics turned to Scout, his blood pooling on the floor, his hip wound deep and raw. "He's losing too much," a paramedic said, her voice urgent. They bandaged the wound hastily, lifting Scout onto a second stretcher with a gentleness born of awe. His body was limp, his breath shallow, but his good eye stayed open, searching for Jim. In the ambulance, Jim stirred, his vision blurry, pain throbbing in his head. He saw Scout on the stretcher beside him, bandaged and bloodied, and his heart ceased. "Scout," he croaked, his hand reaching across the gap, fingers brushing the dog's fur. "Don't leave me again." Scout's lips twitched, a faint whine answering, as if saying, "I'm trying." The medics worked frantically, starting in 4 for Scout, their hands steady despite the blood. "He's a fighter," one said, glancing at Jim. "Hang on, both of you." The ambulance surged through Maple Grove's quiet streets, its siren a wail that echoed the town's collective fear. At the county hospital, Jim was wheeled to the ER, his head injury assessed as a concussion with no fracture. He refused sedation, his eyes fixed on the hallway where Scout had been taken. "Tell me he's alive," he rasped to a nurse, his voice raw. She nodded, her expression soft. "They're working on him now." Caleb and Lily arrived, Caleb's face pale, his hands clutching the wooden toy dog he'd carved for Scout. "Will Scout be okay?" he asked Jim, his voice small. Jim managed a weak smile, his hand squeezing Caleb's shoulder. "He's tough, kid. Like us." But his eyes betrayed his fear, a dread that history might repeat, that Scout might slip away again. In the operating room, Sarah Bennett led the veterinary team, her Gulf War medics calm masking her urgency. Scout lay on the steel table, his body a map of scars old and new, his hip wound deep, blood seeping despite the bandages. "Severe blood loss," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Heart rate's dropping." They started a transfusion, cleaned the wound, and found the knife had nicked a muscle but missed major arteries, a small mercy. The broken leg, aggravated by the fight, was beyond saving. "We have to amputate," Sarah said, her eyes meeting her assistant's. "It's his only chance." The team worked for 3 hours, their hands precise, driven by respect for the dog who'd fought like a Marine. The ambulance's siren wailed through the frosty streets of Maple Grove, Tennessee, cutting the winter night like a blade. Inside, James Jim Sullivan lay on a stretcher, his head throbbing from the intruder's blow, blood crusting on his temple. Across from him, Scout, the 3-legged dog who'd just saved his life, rested on a second stretcher, his body bandaged, blood seeping through the gauze on his hip. The paramedics worked in tense silence, their hands steady as they monitored Scout's faltering pulse and Jim's concussion. Jim's eyes, blurred but desperate, fixed on Scout, his hand reaching across the gap, fingers brushing the dog's matted fur. "Don't leave me, Scout," he rasped, his voice raw with fear. Scout's good eye, a pale gold dimmed by pain, flickered toward Jim, a faint whine escaping as if to say, "I'm trying." The ambulance surged toward the county hospital, carrying two souls bound by war and love, their fates hanging on a thread. The night had begun in the quiet of Jim's farmhouse, where Scout, no longer the skeletal ghost found in the barn, had gained strength through months of care. His fur showed glints of gold, his broken hind leg bandaged but stiff, his blind eye ghostly but his good eye bright. He could sit and stand at Jim's commands, roll in a wooden cart built with Caleb, and wag his tail daily, though his PTSD lingered. Thunder sent him trembling, nightmares left him thrashing. Caleb, the 10-year-old neighbor, had become Scout's friend, his innocence a balm for the dog's trauma. But that peace shattered when an intruder, seeking Jim's war relics, broke in, striking Jim unconscious. Scout, frail but fierce, had lunged, pinning the man despite a knife wound, holding fast until the sheriff arrived. Now, as the ambulance raced on, Maple Grove held its breath, unaware that a hero fought for life in the cold light of sirens. The ambulance's interior was a sterile cocoon, its hum and beeps a stark contrast to the chaos left behind. Jim's head pounded, but pain was secondary to fear. Scout's stretcher was close, yet he seemed a world away, his body limp, blood staining the bandages. The paramedic, a young woman with steady hands, adjusted Scout's her voice low. "He's losing blood fast, but his heart's still going." Jim's throat tightened, memories flooding back, Afghanistan, the blast that stole Scout, the bloodied tag he'd carried home. "He's tougher than me," Jim croaked, his hand trembling as it rested on Scout's side. "Always was." Scout's lips twitched, a faint whine answering, a signal that the warrior within hadn't surrendered. Caleb Miller and his mother, Lily, followed in their car, Caleb clutching the wooden toy dog he'd carved for Scout, his eyes red from tears. He'd seen the police lights, heard the intruder's screams, and known Scout had fought for Jim. "Will Scout be okay, Mom?" he whispered, his voice small. Lily squeezed his hand, her own heart racing. "He's strong, Caleb, like Mr. Jim." But her voice wavered, the image of Scout's bloodied fur seared in her mind. Caleb stared out the window, the toy dog pressed to his chest, praying for the hero who'd become his friend. The ambulance reached the hospital, its doors flying open as medics wheeled Jim to the ER. A nurse assessed his concussion, her voice calm. "No fracture, but we'll keep you overnight." Jim shook his head, his eyes fixed on the hallway where Scout had been taken. "Tell me he's alive," he rasped. The nurse nodded, her expression soft. "They're working on him now." Jim's hand gripped the stretcher, his fear a vice around his heart. He couldn't lose Scout again, not after the barn, the months of care, the tail wags that had rebuilt his hope. In the veterinary operating room, Sarah Bennett, Maple Grove's veterinarian and former Gulf War medic, led the team with a calm born of battlefields. Scout lay on the steel table, his body a map of scars old and new, his hip wound deep and bleeding. Monitors beeped, their rhythm erratic, tracking Scout's faltering heart. "Severe blood loss," Sarah said, her voice steady but urgent. "Heart rate's dropping." The team started a transfusion, cleaned the wound, and found the knife had nicked a muscle but spared major arteries, a small mercy. Scout's broken hind leg, aggravated by the fight, was beyond repair, its bones misaligned, the tissue swollen. "We have to amputate," Sarah said, her eyes meeting her assistant's. "It's his only chance." The surgery stretched into hours, a grueling fight against time. Sarah's hands moved with precision, stitching muscle, removing the shattered leg, her mind flashing to her medic days when she'd saved soldiers under fire. Scout's heart wavered, the monitor's beep slowing, but Sarah spoke to him, her voice low. Stay with us, Scout. Jim needs you." The team worked in sync, their respect for the dog palpable, a warrior who'd fought for his master, now fighting for his life. They stabilized the bleeding, closed the wound, and fitted a temporary bandage where the leg had been. Scout's pulse steadied, weak but persistent, a flicker of the soldier's spirit that had survived 7 years alone. Outside, Jim sat in a hospital chair, refusing sleep despite the pain in his head. Caleb and Lily joined him, Caleb's eyes wide with fear, the toy dog clutched tight. "Will Scout make it, Mr. Jim?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jim managed a weak smile, his hand squeezing Caleb's shoulder. "He's tougher than both of us, kid. He's got two." But his eyes betrayed his dread, a fear that history would repeat, that Scout would slip away. Lily placed a hand on Jim's arm, her voice soft. "He's in good hands with Sarah." Jim nodded, his throat too tight for words, his gaze fixed on the hallway, willing Scout to fight. Maple Grove stirred as news of the attack spread. Hank Thompson, Jim's fellow veteran, arrived at the hospital, his cane tapping the floor, his face grim. "Heard about your dog, Jim," he said, his voice gruff. "Tough son of a gun." Jim nodded, his smile faint. The diner on Main Street buzzed with whispers, Jim's war hero dog, the intruder caught, the blood on the farmhouse floor. The town's Christmas lights glowed softly, but the festive cheer felt distant, overshadowed by the fight unfolding in the hospital. Pastor Reed from the white-steepled church stopped by, offering a prayer for Jim and Scout, his voice a quiet comfort. "They're warriors, both of them," he said, and Jim gripped his hand, grateful for the words. Caleb sat beside Jim, his toy dog a talisman. He whispered to it, as if speaking to Scout, "You gotta come back. I need you." His fear had hardened into resolve, a child's faith in the hero who'd fought for Jim. Lily watched, her heart aching, seeing in Caleb a strength she hadn't known he had. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed, the clock ticking past 3 a.m., each second a weight on Jim's chest. He remembered Afghanistan, the blast, Scout's absence, the bloodied tag. "I can't lose him again," he whispered, his voice breaking, his hands clasped tight as if in prayer. After 3 grueling hours, Sarah emerged from the operating room, her white coat stained with blood, her face lined with exhaustion, but lit with cautious hope. "Jim," she said, her voice soft. Scout made it through. Jim's breath caught, his eyes welling as he gripped the chair. "He's alive," he rasped, needing to hear it again. Sarah nodded, her Gulf War medic's calm softening. "He lost a lot of blood, more than most could endure, but the transfusion saved him. We had to amputate the hind leg, it was too damaged. He's stable, but critical. The next few hours are key." Jim exhaled, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Can I see him?" he asked, his voice raw. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, "He needs rest." She led Jim to the recovery room, where Scout lay on a padded bed, hooked to monitors, his body bandaged, the stump of his hind leg a stark absence. His good eye was closed, his breath shallow but steady, the monitor's beep a fragile hymn. Jim knelt beside him, his hand trembling as it rested on Scout's head, feeling the soft fur. "You fought for me, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick. "Now rest." "I'm here." Scout's tail twitched, a faint wag, and Jim's heart soared, a signal that Scout was still fighting, still his soldier. Caleb peered through the door, clutching his toy dog, his eyes wide with awe. "He's gonna be okay, right?" he whispered. Jim nodded, his smile weak but genuine. "He's got us, kid. That's enough." Sarah placed a hand on Jim's shoulder, her voice low. "He's a hero, Jim. Like you." Jim shook his head, his eyes fixed on Scout. "He's tougher than me. Always was." The winter night in Maple Grove, Tennessee, was a tapestry of frost and fear, the hospital's fluorescent lights casting a stark glow over Jim Sullivan's weary face. He sat in a hard chair in the waiting area, his head bandaged from the intruder's blow, his hands clasped tight as if holding on to hope itself. Across from him, Caleb Miller, the 10-year-old neighbor who'd become Scout's friend, clutched the wooden toy dog he'd carved, his eyes red but resolute. Lily, Caleb's mother, sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her own heart heavy with worry. The county hospital hummed with quiet urgency, its halls a lifeline for two souls bound by war and love, Jim and Scout, the three-legged dog who'd just saved his master's life. In the veterinary operating room, Sarah Bennett fought to save Scout, his bloody body a testament to courage. The clock ticked past 3 a.m., each second a weight on Jim's chest, as Maple Grove held its breath for a hero. In the sterile chill of the operating room, Sarah Bennett, Maple Grove's veterinarian and former Gulf War medic, led her team with a calm forged in battlefields. Scout lay on the steel table, his body a map of scars old and new, his hip wound deep and bleeding, the knife slice a cruel addition to his 7-year ordeal. Monitors beeped erratically, tracking Scout's faltering heart, a rhythm that wavered like a candle in a storm. Heart rates dropping, Sarah said, her voice steady but urgent. The team had started a transfusion, cleaned the wound, and found the knife had nicked a muscle but spared major arteries, a fragile mercy. Scout's broken hind leg, aggravated by his heroic lunge, was beyond repair, its bones misaligned, the tissue swollen and necrotic. Amputation's the only way, Sarah confirmed, her eyes meeting her assistant's. Let's move. The surgery was a grueling battle, stretching into its 4th hour. Sarah's hands moved with precision, stitching muscle, removing the shattered leg, her mind flashing to her medic days when she'd saved soldiers under fire. Scout's heart faltered, the monitors beeped slowing, a chilling pause that gripped the room. "Come on," Scout Sarah whispered, her voice low but fierce. "Jim needs you. Fight." She adjusted the transfusion, her assistant monitoring oxygen levels, their teamwork a silent bow to honor the dog who'd fought like a Marine. They cauterized vessels, closed the wound, and fitted a temporary bandage where the leg had been, now a smooth stump. Scout's pulse steadied, weak but persistent, a flicker of the soldier's spirit that had survived the Afghan blast, 7 years of wandering and a knife in the dark. Sarah's team worked with the reverence born of awe. Scout wasn't just a patient, he was a warrior, his scars a chronicle of loyalty. The knife wound, though deep, was cleanable and the transfusion replaced what he'd lost pinning the intruder. The amputation, though drastic, freed Scout from the leg's pain, a sacrifice for survival. As they stitched the final sutures, Sarah spoke to Scout, her voice a tether. "You're almost there, soldier." The monitor's beep grew steadier, a fragile hymn of life, and Sarah exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. "He's through the worst," she told her assistant, her Gulf War medic's calm softening. "Now it's up to him." Outside, Jim's vigil was a silent prayer, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. The hospital's waiting area was a stark contrast to the farmhouse's warmth, its fluorescent was a cold reminder of fragility. Caleb sat beside him, the wooden toy dog pressed to his chest, his eyes fixed on the hallway. "Will Scout make it, Mr. Jim?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Jim managed a weak smile, his hand squeezing Caleb's shoulder. "He's tougher than us, kid." "He's got to." But his voice trembled, his fear a vice around his heart. He remembered Afghanistan, the blast, Scout's absence, the bloodied tag he'd carried home. "I can't lose him again," he whispered, his eyes stinging, his Marine resolve cracking under the weight of love. Lily, Caleb's mother, offered a quiet strength, her hand resting on Jim's arm. "Sarah's the best, Jim. Scout's in good hands." Jim nodded, his throat too tight for words, his gaze locked on the hallway, willing Scout to fight. Hank Thompson, Jim's fellow veteran, sat nearby, his cane propped against the wall, his face grim. "Tough dog, Jim," he said, his voice gruff. "Like you." Jim's smile was faint, his thoughts with Scout, the dog who'd saved him 3 times in war, in the barn, and now in the farmhouse. The town stirred as news spread. The diner on Main Street, buzzing with whispers, Jim's war hero dog, the intruder caught, the blood on the floor. Pastor Reed from the white-steepled church arrived, offering a prayer, his voice a comfort. They're warriors, both of them. Jim gripped his hand, grateful for the words. Caleb's presence was a lifeline, his child's faith a beacon in the dark. He whispered to the toy dog, as if speaking to Scout, "You gotta come back. I need you." His fear had hardened into resolve, a maturity born of watching Scout fight. Lily watched, her heart aching, seeing in Caleb a strength she hadn't known he had. The hospital's clock ticked on, each minute an eternity, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows. Jin's memories swirled, Scout sprinting through minefields, curling against him in bunkers, the barn's dust where he'd found him alive. "He's my brother," Jim murmured, his voice barely audible, a confession to the night. At 4:30 a.m., Sarah emerged from the operating room, her white coat stained with blood, her face etched with exhaustion, but lit with cautious hope. "Jim," she said, her voice soft. Scout made it through. Jim's breath caught, his eyes welling as he gripped the chair, his body sagging with relief. "He's alive," he rasped, needing to hear it again. Sarah nodded, her medic's calm softening. "He lost a lot of blood, more than most could endure, but the transfusion saved him. We amputated the hind leg, it was too damaged. He's stable, but critical. The next few hours are key." Jim exhaled, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, his hands trembling. "Can I see him?" he asked, his voice raw. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, "He needs rest." She led Jim to the recovery room, a quiet space bathed in soft yellow light, where Scout lay on a padded bed, hooked to monitors. His body was bandaged, the stump of his hind leg a stark absence, his fur matted with antiseptic. His good eye was closed, his breath shallow but steady, the monitors beep a fragile hymn of life. Jim knelt beside him, his hand trembling as it rested on Scout's head, feeling the soft fur. "You fought for me, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "Now rest." "I'm here." Scout's tail twitched, a faint wag, and his good eye cracked open, a pale gold glinting with recognition. Jim's heart soared, a sob escaping as he pressed his forehead to Scout's, feeling the dog's breath against his skin. "You're my hero," he murmured, his voice breaking. Caleb peered through the door, clutching his toy dog, his eyes wide with awe. "He's gonna be okay, right?" he whispered, his voice trembling with hope. Jim nodded, his smile weak but genuine. "He's got us, kid. That's enough." Sarah placed a hand on Jim's shoulder, her voice low. "He's a hero, Jim. Like you." Jim shook his head, his eyes fixed on Scout. "He's tougher than me. Always was." Caleb stepped closer, his hand brushing Scout's blanket, his toy dog placed beside it like a sentinel. "I knew you'd fight," he whispered, his voice small but fierce. Scout's tail gave another faint wag, a signal that he heard, that he was still fighting. As dawn broke over Maple Grove, painting the hills in soft pinks, the town rallied around its heroes. The diner on Main Street became a hub of support, folks dropping off casseroles and coffee for Jim and Lily. Hank Thompson organized a collection among veterans, raising funds for Scout's medical bills, his gruff voice rallying the group. "That dog's one of us." Pastor Reed led a prayer at the church, the congregation bowing heads for Jim and Scout, their voices a chorus of hope. The local paper ran a front-page story, "More Hero Dog Saves Marine in Maple Grove," with a photo of Jim and Scout from the Harvest Festival, Scout's cart gleaming in the sun. Lily took Caleb home to rest, but he refused to sleep, sitting by his window with the toy dog, watching the farmhouse. "Scout's my hero," he told Lily, his voice steady, a maturity born of the night's terror. Lily hugged him, her eyes wet, grateful for the bond that had given her son strength. Jim stayed at the hospital, discharged but refusing to leave Scout's side. Sarah updated him hourly, her voice cautious but hopeful. "He's holding steady. Stronger than I expected." Jim nodded, his hand clutching Scout's old tag, its dented edge a reminder of their first training day. "He's always been stronger," he said, his voice soft. By noon, Scout's condition improved, his pulse stronger, his breaths deeper. Sarah allowed Jim and Caleb a longer visit, the recovery room now a sanctuary of hope. Scout's good eye opened wider, his tail wagging faintly at Jim's voice. "You're doing good, buddy." Caleb placed a small scarf, knitted by Lily, around Scout's neck, its blue yarn soft against his fur. "For when you come home," he whispered, his eyes bright. Scout leaned into Caleb's hand, a soft whine escaping, a bond forged in love now unbreakable. Jim watched, his heart full, seeing in Caleb a grandson, in Scout a brother, a family rebuilt from war's ashes. As evening fell, Maple Grove's Christmas lights glowed, a quiet celebration of survival. Scout was moved to a recovery kennel, his monitor steady, his body beginning to heal. Sarah estimated weeks of rest, but her eyes held hope. "He'll walk again, Jim. Maybe not like before, but he'll walk." Jim nodded, his smile genuine, his fear easing. He took Caleb to the diner, where folks clapped him on the back, calling Scout a hero. Hank handed Jim an envelope, donations from veterans, enough for Scout's care. "For your soldier," he said, his voice gruff. Jim gripped his hand, his eyes wet. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick. Back at the farmhouse, Jim sat by the fire, Scout's blanket empty but waiting. The radio played Tennessee Waltz, its notes a quiet promise. Caleb curled up beside him, the toy dog in his lap, his eyes heavy but hopeful. "When Scout comes home, can I read to him again?" he asked, his voice soft. Jim ruffled his hair, his smile warm. "Every day, kid." He looked at the cigar box, Scout's tag glinting inside, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Scout had fought for him, and now Jim would fight for Scout's future, a life of grass under wheels, Caleb's laughter, and a home where no one was left behind. The dawn of a winter morning broke over Maple Grove, Tennessee, painting the hospital's windows with soft pinks and golds, a quiet promise after a night of terror. Inside the county hospital's recovery room, Scout lay on a padded bed, his three-legged body bandaged, the stump of his amputated hind leg a stark reminder of his sacrifice. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking his fragile pulse, a hymn of survival that echoed in Jim Sullivan's heart. Jim knelt beside Scout, his head bandaged from the intruder's blow, his calloused hand resting gently on the dog's head, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingers. "You fought for me, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude, tears tracing lines down his weathered cheeks. Scout's good eye, a pale gold dimmed by pain but alive, cracked open, and his tail gave a faint wag, a flicker of the K-9 soldier who defied war, abandonment, and a knife in the dark. Across the room, Caleb Miller, the 10-year-old whose heart had woven into Scout's, stood clutching his carved wooden toy dog, his eyes wide with awe and hope. The air held a sacred stillness, a moment where Maple Grove's hero clung to life, binding three souls in a bond stronger than steel. Scout's recovery began in the quiet hours after surgery, each small sign a miracle carved from courage. The amputation of his hind leg, necessitated by the intruder's attack and years of untreated damage, had freed him from pain but left him fragile. His fur, matted with antiseptic, showed glints of gold beneath the scars, a testament to months of Jim's care. His blind eye, clouded like a Tennessee fog, contrasted with his good eye, which flickered with a stubborn spark. Sarah Bennett, the veterinarian and former Gulf War medic, monitored Scout closely, her voice cautious but hopeful. "He's stable," she told Jim at 6 a.m., her white coat still stained from the 4-hour surgery. "His heart's stronger, but he's lost a lot of blood. Rest is critical now." Jim nodded, his throat tight, his hand never leaving Scout's side. "He's tougher than me," he rasped, his voice a mix of pride and fear. By mid-morning, Scout stirred, his good eye opening wider, tracking Jim's voice. When Jim said Scout, the dog's ears twitched and his tail wagged again, a faint but deliberate arc Jim's heart soared, a sob escaping as he pressed his forehead to Scout's, feeling the dog's shallow breaths. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice breaking. Sarah adjusted the 4, her medic's calm softening. "He's responding well," she said, noting Scout's pulse on the chart. "Give him time, Jim. He's fighting." Caleb stepped closer, his toy dog clutched tight, his voice small but steady. "Can he hear me?" he asked. Sarah nodded, her smile gentle. Caleb leaned in, whispering, "You're my hero, Scout. Keep going." Scout's tail gave another whack, a signal that he heard, that the boy's faith reached him. The hospital's recovery kennel became Scout's temporary home, a quiet space where monitors hummed and soft light filtered through blinds. By evening, Scout lifted his head, his good eye brighter, his breath deeper. Jim fed him a spoonful of broth, his hand steady despite the tremor in his heart. Scout lapped it slowly, his tongue weak but eager, a small victory that brought tears to Jim's eyes. "That's my boy," he murmured, his voice thick. Caleb placed the blue scarf Lily had knitted around Scout's neck, its yarn soft against his fur. "For when you come home," he said, his eyes shining. Scout leaned into Caleb's hand, a soft whine escaping, a bond unbroken by pain. Jim's vigil was a silent prayer, his fear of losing Scout easing with each sign of life. The intruder's blow had left him with a concussion, but the pain was nothing compared to the dread of another loss. Sitting by Scout's kennel, he clutched the dog's old tag, its dented edge a relic of their first training day in Afghanistan. Memories swirled, Scout sprinting through minefields, curling against him in bunkers, the barn's dust where he'd found him alive. "You saved me again," Jim whispered, his voice raw. "I ain't letting you go." Scout's tail wagged, a faint arc, and Jim felt a peace he hadn't known since the war, a sense that they'd carry each other home. Caleb's presence was a lifeline, his child's faith a beacon. The night's terror had aged him, his eyes holding a maturity born of watching Scout fight. He sat cross-legged by the kennel, reading from his Max book, his voice steady. Max slept by the fire, safe. Scout's ears flicked, his good eye fixed on Caleb, a trust that mirrored his bond with Jim. "He's gonna be okay, right?" Caleb asked Jim, his voice small but hopeful. Jim ruffled his hair, his smile genuine. "With you cheering him on, kid?" "Bet on it." Caleb grinned, his toy dog a talisman, and Jim saw in him a grandson, a family rebuilt from war's ashes. Lily, Caleb's mother, offered quiet strength, her hand on Jim's shoulder. "You've given Caleb a hero," she said, her voice soft. Jim shook his head, his eyes on Scout. "He's the hero. We're just along for the ride." The hospital's waiting area filled with Maple Grove support. Hank Thompson brought coffee, his gruff voice rallying. "That dog's one of us." Pastor Reed led a prayer, the town's voices a chorus of hope. The diner sent pecan pie, the local paper's headline reading, "War Hero Dog Saves Marine." Jim gripped each hand, his heart full, grateful for a community that held them close. By the third day, Scout's recovery gained momentum. He ate a full bowl of broth, his pulse strong, his good eye bright with life. Sarah allowed short card outings in the hospital's courtyard, Jim pushing as Scout's nose twitched at the scent of grass. Caleb ran alongside, laughing, his toy dog tucked in his pocket. "He's coming home soon, right?" he asked, his eyes bright. Jim nodded, his smile warm. "Soon, kid." Sarah's prognosis was hopeful, "He'll walk again, Jim. Not like before, but he'll walk." Jim felt a weight lift, his fear giving way to pride. Scout's heroism, the barn, the intruder, the surgery, had rewritten their story, a tale of loyalty that Maple Grove whispered with awe. As Scout grew stronger, the town's pride swelled, unaware that his story would soon echo beyond Tennessee. A video Caleb would record, Scout's three-legged walk, would spark a wave of recognition, leading to the White House and a legacy that would outlive them all. But for now, Jim sat by Scout's kennel, the radio playing Tennessee Waltz, its notes a promise. "We're going home, buddy," he said, his voice steady. Scout's tail wagged, his good eye bright, a hero ready for the next step. The winter of 2012 faded into the soft promise of spring in Maple Grove, Tennessee, where the hills bloomed with dogwoods and the air carried the sweet scent of thawing earth. Inside Jim Sullivan's farmhouse, the fire burned low, its glow a quiet companion to the radio's hum of Johnny Cash's Tennessee flat-top box. Scout, the three-legged dog who defied war, abandonment, and a knife in the dark, rested on his wool blanket, his body stronger, his fur a patchwork of gold over scars. The wooden cart, crafted by Jim and Caleb, stood by the door, its wheels worn from daily outings, a testament to Scout's return. Jim sat in his recliner, his weathered face softened by pride, a marine history book open on his lap. "You're a miracle, buddy," he murmured, his voice warm. Scout's good eye, a pale gold bright with life, met Jim's, his tail wagging faintly. Outside, the town stirred with whispers of a hero, unaware that Scout's story was about to echo far beyond its borders. Scout's recovery was a triumph carved from pain, each milestone a beacon of resilience. The surgery that saved him, amputating his shattered hind leg, had left him with 3 legs, but his spirit was unbroken. His fur, once a tattered quilt of scars, now gleamed with new gold, soft under Jim's calloused hands. His blind eye, clouded like a winter fog, gave him a ghostly look, but his good eye shone with clarity, a window to the K-9 soldier who'd saved Jim 3 times. The hip wound from the intruder's knife had healed, a pink scar beneath his fur, a badge of courage. Scout's breaths were steady, his ribs no longer stark, his weight climbing with each bowl of rice and chicken Jim fed him. Sarah Bennett, the veterinarian and former Gulf War medic, marveled at his progress. "He's stronger than most," she said, checking Scout's stitches. "But keep it slow, Jim. He's still healing." Jim's caregiving remained a devotion, his days a rhythm of love. Each morning, he warmed broth, the savory scent mingling with wood smoke, though Scout now ate eagerly from a chipped ceramic dish. Jim massaged Scout's remaining limbs, easing stiffness, his hands gentle despite their ache. The wooden cart, upgraded with softer wheels thanks to Caleb's sketch, was Scout's chariot. Jim pushed it along the fence line, the grass crunching underfoot, Scout's nose twitching at the scent of spring blossoms. By March, Scout could stand unaided for minutes, his front legs firm at Jim's command, "Stand." His tail wagged firmly, a joyful arc, and when Jim said search, Scout's nose twitched, dragging himself forward an inch, a reflex from their war days. Jim's journal filled with entries. March 12th. Stood 5 seconds. Tail wagged hard. "You're my soldier," Jim said, his voice thick with pride. Scout's PTSD, though persistent, softened under Jim and Caleb's care. Thunder still made him tremble, but Jim's voice, "You're safe, buddy," and Caleb's gentle touch calmed him. Nightmares grew rarer, Scout's sleep steadier, his good eye closing with trust. Jim played the radio, Willie Nelson's Blue Eyes crying in the rain, soothing Scout's nerves, a quiet anthem of their shared healing. Caleb, the 10-year-old neighbor whose fear had turned to love, was a daily presence, his laughter a light in Scout's world. He read from his Max book, his voice steady. Max slept by the fire, safe. Scout leaned into Caleb's hand, a soft whine escaping, a bond forged in innocence. A spring morning marked a milestone that brought tears to Jim's eyes. Under the farmhouse's maple tree, its leaves budding green, Jim unstrapped the cart and said, "Walk." Scout hesitated, his good eye wide, but Jim's steady gaze urged him on. With a trembling effort, Scout pushed forward, his 3 legs wobbling but resolute, taking 2 steps before sinking back. His tail wagged, a triumphant arc, and Jim knelt beside him, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You did it, Scout," he whispered, his voice breaking. Caleb, watching from the fence, clapped, his face alight. "He's a hero," he shouted, running to hug Scout. Jim wrote, April 3rd, took 2 steps. My heart's full. Scout's rebirth wasn't just a private victory, it became a beacon for the world. One April afternoon, Caleb, inspired by Scout's steps, recorded a short video on Lily's old phone. The clip showed Scout walking, his 3 legs unsteady but proud, Jim's voice in the background. "That's it, buddy." Caleb posted it online with a caption, "Scout's got 3 legs, but he's stronger than ever." The video, raw and unpolished, spread like wildfire, shared by veteran groups, animal lovers, and small-town folks. Within days, it had thousands of views, then millions, a wave of hope in a world weary of division. Comments flooded in, "This dog's a hero." "God bless Scout and Jim." Maple Grove buzzed with pride, the diner on Main Street a hub of chatter. Hank Thompson, Jim's fellow veteran, slapped the counter, grinning. "Your dog's famous, Jim." The local paper ran a story, Maple Grove's 3-legged hero, with a photo of Scout in his cart. National outlets followed, the Washington Post, Time, calling Scout a symbol of loyalty. A documentary filmmaker proposed a feature, but Jim waved it off, his focus on Scout. "He don't need cameras," he said, his voice gruff. "He needs grass under his wheels." The video reached unexpected heights when a senator's daughter, moved by Scout's story, shared it with her father. The senator, a veteran himself, contacted the White House, and in May a letter arrived at the farmhouse, its seal gleaming. Jim opened it, his hands trembling, and read aloud to Caleb, "On behalf of a grateful nation, we invite you and Scout to Washington, D.C. for a ceremony honoring Scout with the Presidential Medal of Animal Valor." Caleb's eyes widened, his grin lighting the room. "Scout's going to the White House." Jim shook his head, his smile faint but proud. "Looks like they heard of you, buddy," he said, stroking Scout's head. In June 2012, Jim and Scout traveled to Washington, D.C., the farmhouse left in Lily's care. Jim wore a simple suit, his Marine medals pinned to his chest, while Scout's cart was polished, a blue scarf from Caleb around his neck. The Rose Garden was a sea of flags and ribbons filled with veterans, dignitaries, and animal welfare advocates. A country band played Sweet Home Alabama, its notes a nod to Scout's Tennessee roots, warming Jim's heart. Scout rolled beside him, his good eye bright, his tail wagging at the crowd's murmurs. The president approached, his smile genuine, and knelt to place the silver medal with a red ribbon around Scout's neck. "Scout," he said, his voice carrying, "you remind us that loyalty endures through war, time, and pain." The crowd stood, their applause a wave of gratitude, not for ceremony, but for a truth embodied by a 3-legged dog. Jim stepped to the podium, his hands steady despite the knot in his throat. "Scout ain't just a dog," he said, his voice gruff but clear. "He's my brother. He saved me in Afghanistan, in a barn, and in my home. He never left anyone behind." His eyes found Scout, who raised his front leg, a trembling salute, his tail wagging. The crowd fell silent. Tears in their eyes, a woman in uniform wiped her cheek. A retired general bowed his head. Caleb, watching via live stream at the diner, clutched his toy dog. The moment was a prayer, a nation pausing to honor a hero who spoke no words but lived loyalty. As they left the stage, Thomas "Tom" Hayes, Jim's old squad mate, approached, his limp a reminder of their war days. thought I'd lost you, Scout, Tom said, kneeling, his voice cracking. Scout leaned into his hand, a soft whine escaping, a reunion of warriors. Jim and Tom embraced, their hug mending years of silence, Scout's presence a bridge across time. The ceremony ended, but Scout's story lingered, his medal glinting in the news, a symbol of resilience. Jim and Scout returned to Maple Grove, the farmhouse a haven of quiet. Summer 2012 bloomed, the maple trees leaves a green canopy over their yard. Scout's 3 legs carried him short distances, his cart used for longer outings, his tail wagging at Caleb's laughter. Jim and Caleb took him to the wheat field, the grass soft under Scout's wheels, the air sweet with honeysuckle. Scout's good eye shone, his PTSD a faint shadow, calmed by Jim's voice and Caleb's stories. The town embraced them. Hank brought venison stew, Lily sent pecan pie, the diner hung a photo of Scout's medal. Jim felt a peace he hadn't known, Scout's presence a balm for his war wounds. In May 2013, a year after the White House, Scout's strength began to fade, his breath slower, his good eye dimming. Jim sensed it, his heart heavy but calm. One bright morning, under the maple tree, Scout lay beside Jim, his head on Jim's boots. Caleb reading from Mac's Scout's, tail gave a final wag, his good eye closing, his breaths easing into silence. Jim held him, tears falling, but his voice was steady. You fought good, buddy. Rest now. Caleb buried his face in Scout's fur, whispering, I love you. They buried Scout under the maple, a wooden sign carved by Jim. Scout, comrade, soldier, hero. Scout's passing left a void, but his legacy grew. Caleb, now 11, told Scout's story in school, his voice steady, inspiring his classmates. A girl in his class, daughter of a senator, shared it with her father, sparking a movement. In 2014, Congress passed the Scout Act, ensuring lifelong care for military K-9s, its first page bearing a photo of Scout and Jim under the maple tree. The image spread, textbooks, veteran centers, tattoos on soldiers' arms, a symbol of loyalty. Jim stayed in Maple Grove, the farmhouse quieter but warm with memories. He kept Scout's tag, Caleb's toy dog, and the medal in his cigar box, treasures of a life reclaimed. Each spring, Jim sat under the maple tree, Caleb beside him, the town's hum a quiet backdrop. He's still here, Caleb said, touching the sign, his voice strong. Jim nodded, his smile soft. Always will be, kid. The radio played Tennessee Waltz, its notes a promise that some heroes never fade, their paw prints etched in hearts forever.